Hey everyone, it's Scott from Heroic Cities Gaming coming at you with another video. This is actually a repeat video. I already made this video on Vampire the Masquerade, which is different from the World of Darkness video, which I made a little while back. This is a different video. I already made a video on Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition where I specifically talked about the 5th edition of Vampire the Masquerade, but going over the video I discovered that there were lots of little flaws and issues, so I decided that it was probably better if I didn't present you with incorrect information because I don't know, I said things wrong. But present you with the actual information about the game and an honest review of it. So today, low production quality that I am, we're making a video on Vampire the Masquerade. This is 5th edition. This is the edition produced by Paradox Interactive and Renegade Game Studios, which is apparently the second printing of the book. The original version was created by White Wolf, and then it was sort of handed off to Modifius. And from what I understand, this version of the book is a little bit cleaner and more organized, sort of like the way that Cubicle 7 did to the Wrath and Glory book when they took it over from Ulysses Spiel, where they didn't change anything, they just kind of cleaned it up and made it more organized and nicer, which is an interesting thing to say considering that you have dozens of pages of random world-building information in character that is not necessary for playing the game, and so it could have been a lot more streamlined if they just cut out, like, was it 30 pages of random world-building exposition right at the beginning, and throughout, like, every chapter essentially begins with a story, and like from a perspective of a character, and that's cool if you wanted to set up like a feels, right? But it's really not cool when you're trying to learn how to play a game. The other thing they did really badly in the design of the book, and I don't know why they kept it in the revised edition, is that the print is very small and very thin, and so the font is hard to read, despite the fact that it's like it's not like they cram the pages with a bunch of text or anything, so, you know, they had the space to work with. But they decided to go with, like, a thin, small font for ambiance, but, like, for people with eye problems, that's really bad. And I only know this, like, I don't have any eye problems, but I showed it to my friend, as you know, that I do from time to time, and he had to put on his glasses and then was, like, kind of still doing, like, a kind of thing trying to read it, and that's not a good sign. So that's not a good feel or good look, which is why I'm glad that they didn't do that for later things, which we'll talk about in other videos in the future. But anyway, that's the game. That's what we're doing, and I just talked about the book. But let's talk about the brief history of why it exists in the first place. So Vampire the Masquerade, I've already made a video on World of Darkness. You can go watch that if you want to find out more. But and White Wolf and the Fall of White Wolf. But essentially, this game was created in '91 as the first flagship project for the White Wolf publications, and they made it. It was their first product. It gained popularity in the '90s because it hit at the right time to like grow with the goth culture. As the trench coat wearing, sunglass wearing goth culture grew, so too did Vampire the Masquerade, which was essentially their non-D&D version, or non-D&D RPG, right? So it was a non-D&D game that allowed them to embrace the whole wearing trench coats and sunglasses at night, which was cool. And so it grew with the goth culture and sort of entwined itself and ingrained itself with that culture to the point where I just sort of assumed that everyone who was in the goth culture that played role-playing games played in Vampire the Masquerade. And the LARP that I played in the early 2000s was just full of a bunch of those gothy people. So, I mean, you know, there it is. But it's been around for a while, and then when I thought the goth culture had sort of died off, it really hasn't. I have friends who are still involved in the goth culture here in my area, and so I know that the goth culture exists, but it's significantly smaller than it used to be. But as it died off, I thought that this game had kind of disappeared a bit, but then I found out I was wrong, and I'm pleasantly surprised, so I gave it a chance, and that's why we're talking about it today. It has inspired lots of video games. The company that actually owns it, Paradox Interactive, is a video game company. And so there's recently has been a few games that have come out. There's Swan Song and Blood Hunt, and I mean, Bloodlines is always saying Bloodline 2 is coming out. And a bunch of interactive novels, as you know, because I already covered those this month, or the month of June when this video should have been made. And so it's pretty cool and pretty big. But V5, Vampire 5th edition, is actually not the 5th edition. The first edition, like I said, came out in 91. Second edition came out in 92. Then there was this big gap of time, and then there was a revised version that came out in 98. And then in 2004, it was mothballed and put on the shelf because they decided to go with the new World of Darkness stuff, where they released a core book that was about being immortals, and then they released all of these other games that were sort of supplement splat books that went on top of it. So Vampire the Requiem was sort of a splat book that went on top of the Chronicles of Darkness, or the World of Darkness book that it is now called Chronicles of Darkness, was set on top of it, and then you kind of needed both to really understand what you were doing. And so that would have been third edition if you consider it that way. But because it's an entirely different game with like similar background, like it has a lot of the same background, so you could say that it's the same game. It is different playthrough, different dice roll kind of feels, different sort of interactions with the universe, and so it's basically its own separate game. So it's not really third edition. But even if it were, if we were to call that third edition, then we would have to recognize that. So in the 2010, when the 20th anniversary, or 2011, when the 20th anniversary hit, they released all of the old books, Vampire the Masquerade and Werewolf the Apocalypse and Mage the Ascension. They re-released them as in a cleaned up, nice, organized format called the 20th anniversary editions. And so that might be what you would consider. If you considered the Vampire the Requiem as the third edition, then you would consider Vampire the 20th anniversary edition the fourth edition, when really it's not any different edition. It's just it's second edition cleaned up some more and streamlined to match the other 20th anniversary editions to fit them together a little bit better. But you could consider that fourth edition. But really, there was officially, according to Paradox Interactive, there was a fourth edition that was being created by Onyx Path / White Wolf at the time that they purchased it from CCP Games, and then they just scrapped that. The fourth edition just was crap, and they're like, scrap that. We're gonna do something else. And so they did. And so that's what they said. So they don't consider the Requiem or the 20th anniversary the fourth edition at all. So like there's no fourth edition according to them. At best, they consider the 20th anniversary edition the third edition. And so that's where they fall. They just scrapped fourth edition. They just felt like it. And I also think that they were kind of banking on the D&D fifth edition thing, which was kind of getting popular and stuff. So that's what I think. But anyway, so let's talk about what the difference is in the fifth edition, what it is. So like the previous editions, and to be fair, my experience comes from that LARP and some of my other interactions with Mage the Ascension and Mage the Awakening and then Hunter the Vigil. My interactions with the World of Darkness are based on those interactions. So fifth edition is different. It is dramatically different. So one thing that's majorly different about it is that instead of looking for 8s, 9s, or 10s on your D10 dice rolls, the system is D10s, as it always was. The system is D10s, and it's usually designed by making a pool from taking like a stat and a skill. So you might have like you're going to try to convince someone that you are like you're going to lie to them. So you would use like your charisma and then your subterfuge, right? And you'd put those together. So you have like 3 in charisma, so it's 3 dice, and then you have 2 in subterfuge. You put those together, that's 5 dice, right? And that's how you would do it. At best, you're going to roll like 10, potentially 12 dice at best. That's like expert level, like world-class level stuff. So you're generally rolling like 5 to 6 dice. That's pretty normal for most things that you're doing. But usually you're going to roll these D10s, and you're looking for a difficulty of that's going to be like a 1, or well, in the older editions, it was like 6, 7, 8, like that's how many successes you needed on the die. In the newer edition, it's a bit smaller, and there's some reasons for that. I guess they want more successes, but you're originally looking for 8, 9s, or 10s, and now you're looking for 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So there's a 50% chance of succeeding on each die, and then the number of dice, increases your chances, so you just keep having these greater chances. So the more dice you have, the more likely you are to succeed in whatever you're doing. But they set a difficulty between 1 through 7, kind of. So like 4 would be like an average difficulty for things, and that's kind of hard. I've tried testing it out with some rolling, and that 4 is kind of hard. But they offset that by doing something very cool with the criticals, where if you roll a 10, you get a critical. That's critical success, and it's just a 1 success unless you have 2 of them. If you have 2 10s, then it becomes 4 successes. It doubles the number of successes you have. If you have just 1, it's 1. If you have 2, it's 4. If you have 3, it's 5 because there's 4 plus 1. And if you have 4 10s, then you have 8, right? So you see where this is going? So it's a very cool sort of system for trying to nail down these like ridiculously hard things with like these really cool criticals. And so that's the whole gameplay. Like essentially you'll have either trying to defeat a challenge where difficulty is like 4 and you have to get that many of successes, or it'll be an opposed roll where you and another party are opposing each other, which is usually what happens in fights, gunfights, car chases, social fights, whatever. That's going to be when you have conflicts, you'll have opposing dice, and so you'll roll your pool. They'll roll the same pool unless they're like dodging, right? Something that's the like an athletics thing rather than just like an attack thing. And they'll roll their pool, and then you'll compare the number of successes you get, the person with the most. Back to what I was saying. If you meet their number of successes, that's success, you did the thing, and then anything above their number of successes is considered a margin, which is how you determine damage. So the number of hits you get in the margin is the number of damage you do. But if you have like weapons, they'll add like a +2 or +3 or something. So you'll have like +2 to your to whatever you do to your margin. So then it'll do extra damage, right? That's how it works. Pretty simple system. But anyway, there's one thing about the dice rolling that is actually really cool that they did for 5th edition that I actually quite enjoy. And one thing is that in the previous editions, you had to deal with your blood, but not in the way that was like in your face. It was just like a thing that you had. You had blood. You could do blood potency stuff. You could use your blood for various certain special abilities. But it basically just sort of existed out there, and you just, it just was. Sometimes you'd have to, I think like every day it was assumed that you just automatically drank blood when you woke up because that's just how it was, because you had to use blood to wake up. And you could use blood in the background, but there was never really a thing for it. But now, in the new edition, blood is like in your face and very important, and you use it all the time for literally everything. What you can do with blood, you use it when you wake up, when you start your day as a vampire. Each time you wake up at dawn, you will try to do a rouse the blood check to see if you do wake up. I mean, you'll wake up, but the question is whether or not you get hungrier because of it. Statistically, you'll have one die. Well, it depends on your blood potency. So one thing to understand is that your generation of vampire determines how potent your blood is. And like if you have 2 potency or 3 potency or whatever, you roll that many dice to determine if you succeed or not in the rousing of the blood or gaining hunger. So that's what you do there. So you're going to start off probably with 1 as a starting vampire. If you're an advanced vampire, you may have 2 or 3. Whoa, scary. But you're going to roll that die, and if you get a success, then you're fine. You didn't get hunger. If you failed, then you had to use blood to wake up, and so you use the blood, and so you get another point of hunger. And so that's a thing to track, and I'll explain that in a second. But you can use the die for various things, or you can use this rouse the blood stuff for various things that your character can do that are special abilities vampires can do, but you can also use your blood for special abilities you have. Sometimes you have to make this rouse the blood check for a special ability you're doing, and that sort of keeps you recognizing that you're constantly using your blood for these various powers. Sometimes you don't end up getting hungrier from rousing the blood, and sometimes you do. Statistically, the more often you rouse the blood, the more likely you are to get hungry, because statistically you're going to fail, right? So that's what happens. So you rouse the blood a lot more often, so you use your blood, so you get hungrier. Now, this is very important to note, because the way that the system works is that I explained before, you have your stat plus your skill to make your die pool. So, like, you're gonna convince someone that you're doing something, that you are someone or whatever. You're gonna lie to them. You use your charisma 3, and your subterfuge 2, as my previous example. So it's 5 dice. Now, what you will do is before you roll those dice, you're going to replace the die in that pool with a number of die that are equal to your hunger. So if your hunger is 1, you're going to replace 1 die with 1 hunger die. If you're going to replace, if you have 2, then you're going to replace 2 of them with 2 hunger dice, right? 3, you're going to replace 3 with 3 hunger dice. You see where I'm going with this? It's very simple. And these hunger dice are special dice. They look exactly like, they act exactly like the other dice, except that on these dice, when you roll a 1, you have this potentiality of failing badly. Also, when you roll a 10, you also have the potentiality of succeeding in a crazy way. So essentially, the 2 outcomes from the die are going to be like a regular success or a failure, right? Like, it's just how it's going to be. Or a 1, or which is called a bestial failure, or a messy critical. These are things that come up. So the way that it works is on your dice roll, if any of your dice, 1 or more of your 10s on your critical success, right? When you go to roll your dice, if 1 or more are 10s, then you run into this thing called a messy critical. Especially, like if it's just 1 10, like if it's just the only 10, then you're probably fine. If you have 2 10s, right, and you have that critical where you get the double number, so you'll have 4 successes, you're going to succeed in your thing. But because one of those dice, one of those 10s, is a critical, or is a blood die, you have what's called a messy critical. What happens when you do a messy critical is that the beast inside of you, the thing that you're trying to keep down, the horror of vampire, the monster that's inside of you that you're playing as, that monster comes out. And so you still succeed in the action, whatever, convincing the person that you should be let through the police blockade or whatever. Subterfuge doesn't work like that. Like, you're convincing somebody that you're not the vampire they're looking for. But you do that in a way that will break the masquerade or show off your vampiric abilities or, hits on your compulsion. So if you're a Ventrue, for example, I don't know these guys really well because I like playing Ventrues. If you're a Ventrue, then you not just like lie to them and say that you're not them, but you are arrogant about it. So you are like, you act away. That's the way the compulsion works. That's like a special rule. Usually what's going to happen is your eyes are going to glow red, or your fangs are going to come out, or something else that's going to show off that you are a vampire to them with your messy critical. It's important to note because that happens, like, especially if you're in a fight and you're fighting a mortal, that could be real bad because you could just rip them in half because the monster comes out. That's how the criticals work with the messy criticals. Now the ones on the roll, they don't do anything. They don't do anything if you succeeded. If you succeeded, fine. If you failed your roll, however, if you didn't manage to get the number of difficulty that you needed to succeed in the action, then something bad happens. And what the bad happens is you will probably increase your hunger by 1, or there'll be some other effect. You'll either get your hunger will go up. You'll have some kind of dominance. You'll become paranoid. You'll have your clan compulsion, which, like I said, is arrogance in the case of Ventrue, but it's other things for other monsters. And so your clan compulsion will happen, and so then you'll be hungry or whatever. There's this thing like with humanity, right? Like kind of coming into play. And these things are important, so you have this potentiality of letting the beast that's inside of you gain control. And so in 5th edition, the blood and the way that it works is much more important in the system. So this game design is actually pretty smooth for being like, I'm a monster, and I am going to do monstrous things. So I like that change in 5th edition quite a bit. They also try to streamline a lot of stuff. So like I said, the opposition is pretty simple. Like, I'm going to try to punch you. You're going to try to punch me back because we're fighting. Because the actions are not singular actions. So in a fight, a round of combat or conflict, right? A round of conflict is what they call it, to say that it's not just combat, it's also social conflicts and other things. In a round of conflict, we're going to be doing things to each other. I'm going to be doing stuff to you, and you're going to be doing stuff to me, or I'm going to be doing stuff to an NPC, and the NPC is going to be doing stuff back. It's a series of actions and a round, right? And so it's not just one single action. It's like a boxing match round, right? So it wouldn't just be the punch of me punching a person, and then on their turn they punch back. That's not how it works. So this round we're both going to be punching because this is a round of boxing. So we're going to be punching each other, trying to dodge, weave, whatever we're doing to try to fight each other in this conflict. And that's what happens in the round. So then we're going to roll our dice, and that's where we determine that. So that's a pretty slick way of doing combat, because then it's like it could be a series of things. Like it could explain things like reloading. Why do I have to reload after every round? Because I used an entire magazine, because this wasn't just one shot. It was me going like pew 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 pew, and then going pew 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 back, and like there's a thing that happened. So it's a pretty simple system, and then so you only have 3 rounds, because like realistically boxing matches only go for 3 rounds. Like MMA fights only go for 3 rounds. Like, this is the kind of thing that we're talking about here. So it's these cool interactions rather than a singular punch dodge kind of business. And so it's this thing, but you only roll 1 time. So you basically pick what it is you're going to be doing for the whole round. So if you choose you're going to be dodging, then you're literally just going to be trying to duck, weave, and dodge that whole round. And so you're going to make 1 dice roll to see how well you did in comparison to how well they were trying to punch you. Very cool, isn't it? I think it's very smooth and very slick. And then the clans, they got reorganized a little bit. There's some cleaning up of some clans, some organization of some clans. They definitely didn't include certain clans that they probably should have, because people liked them, but they decided they were going to release them later as the Sabbat and as the Anarchs, which already existed. They just organized them differently. And then the really cool thing that they did in 5th edition, and this is basically my thumbs up automatically for the story, or for the game, is that they gave it a story, in that there's always this political game where you're basically playing vampire, and it was really great as a LARP game because you're just playing verbal chess with each other all the time. The the thing they did is they established a metaplot in the story that you are dealing with the people within the Second Inquisition. There's this group of hunters, essentially, that have convinced some high-powered people in government that and that got all the way back to the chain, all the way back to the Vatican, who has always known that monsters are real, and they've pulled enough strings that there's a sort of shadowy sort of thing going on. Not an overt, outright thing necessarily that the government knows that monsters are real and wants to take them down. It's more like the government knows, like people in the government know that monsters are real and believes it and wants to do something about it, but they still have to work around the bureaucracies of the government, and they don't want to just make it outright a thing because they could be deemed crazy. So there's this group of sort of shadowy stuff going on called the Second Inquisition. And this Second Inquisition essentially is a sort of a threat to the vampires that, depending on the type of story you want to tell as the storyteller, is either an open, predominant threat that is literally like your town has been under siege of the Second Inquisition for a while, or it's a shady threat in the background where, like, you probably don't want to use electronic devices because the CIA's tracking data or the NSA's tracking data is tracking your electronic devices. And therefore, if you send a text to somebody like, hey, where's Elysium tonight? And they respond, you guys have just given the government, whichever government it is, the Second Inquisition, the possibility of finding out where you all are because they've got shadowy government peoples helping them do stuff like monitor people's cell phones. It's interesting. It's a very interesting sort of meta-plot going on in the story, which I think creates a cool thing. Because, like, before it was like, you have various different things out there in the world of darkness, and, like, werewolves hate us, so therefore we're, have to deal with werewolves. Like, that's, like, the thing in vampire. But now it's like, yeah, them mortals be scary. Like, I know you got to feed on them, but they also could kill you. Like, legit, why do you maintain the Masquerade? Because that, right? Like that's why. That's why we maintain the Masquerade, because we don't want the Second Inquisition to just burn us all to the ground in our own life. So that is, like, the reason why I'm automatically like this book. Now, as far as this organization goes, it is badly organized. Like I said, it is hard to read and badly organized. In fact, it's like the basic actions that you're going to do is well on the back of the book. And so that's kind of lame and weird and stupid and shouldn't have been that way, but that's how they did it. So, I'm not going to get real mad at them, but that's how they did it. And so we just deal. But the sort of meta plot in Vampire is cool. Now, there is also a layer of, like, more complex things. Like, instead of, like, initiative is, because the fighting was super simple, the initiative is super simple. Like, if you're already engaged in fisticuffs at close range with your friends, there's also really no ranges. There's engaged range and everything else. You're in fisticuffs with this person, then you will go first because you're already in fisticuffs, and then we'll have the ranged people do their ranged attack stuff, and then anyone who wants to start new fisticuffs or do any other actions will go after that, right? And so that's how, like, the initiative works in combat, or conflict, so it shouldn't be hard to figure out who's going first. Like, if you're punching a dude, then you will start the next round by doing more punching. But they do have a layer of additional stuff where you can add initiative, where you have this sort of way of doing who goes first, who goes second, etc. That is like a layer of complexity. Just like there's a layer of complexity with things like grappling and, like, drinking people, and a layer of complexity for, like, using cover and all this other stuff that they added as, like, extra layers of advanced combat or advanced conflict that they added as sort of at the end. But before that, they also have things like hacking computers and, like, sneaking around. And I'm like, those are normal actions. Those aren't advanced actions. That's what you do. You're going to be hacking computers with your technology skill. What else is it for? So a little bit weird, but that's how they did it. But otherwise, so I give it 2 thumbs up. As far as RPG design goes, it's smooth, and the only thing, like, I give maybe 1.5 thumbs because that organization for that book is bad. But I will say that I have been able to obtain a lot of their supplemental stuff because of reasons, which will be discussed in the month of July, for my Hunter month. I have obtained a bunch of their supplemental books to be able to look at them, to find things in them, to use them for a hunter campaign. And the supplemental books have gotten better. So each supplemental book seems to be better than the last one. And so they all seem to be easier designed, clearer, more concise, very smooth, very easy to figure out what you're looking for. And so I think that eventually, if they ever do like a 6th edition or just a revised 5th edition book, they'll probably be able to clean it up nice and smooth, and hopefully not have these billions of miles of like useless just exposition on stuff that is cool if you're doing world building, but not cool if you don't care and you want to learn how to play the game. Which primarily this is a technical manual for how to play the game. Anyway. So that's what I say about Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition, and this is a better video, I think, than the previous version. So hopefully you like it, and I will go replace them. And I gotta splice them together first because I messed up. So that's it. That's for me. I hope that you guys have good gaming times and potentially play Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition and find out what it's all about. So that'll be the end for me. So goodbye.